You are listening to MCC Geopod, the geopolitical podcast of the Mátyás Corvinus Collegium, the largest talent management institute in Hungary. If you want to know more about our mission, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en or check out our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter channels. For interesting articles and analysis of our professors and students, look up our knowledge base at corvinec.hu/en.
I would like to welcome, first of all, Dmytro Tuzhanskyi, our first international guest here on MCC Geopod. Welcome, Dmytro.
Good day, and jó napot kívánok, yes.
He's a journalist and political analyst who has been living in Transcarpathia since decades. You were born there, right? In Transcarpathia?
Actually not, but I grew up.
You grew up there.
Yeah.
And also, Attila Demkó is here with us. As always, my co-host, head of MCC Center for Geopolitics.
Hello.
We would like to talk, it's not a surprise, about Ukraine and the Ukraine-Hungary relations, especially in light of the recent events that have occurred in Transcarpathia, especially. But before, I would like to, without stalling for time, to touch upon Ukraine in general. We are 7-8 years after the Maidan protests. We are more or less 7 years after the outbreak of the Russo-Ukrainian war. So, Dmytro, how do you see the present of your country as a whole, from a geopolitical perspective, from a political one? Just to start off with a more general approach here.
Yes, if to be short, so I have to say that Ukraine is still a kind of a battlefield and battleground for values, European values, yes, democratic values, and it's kind of battlefield in this war with Russia aggression. Still, it's already more than 6 years. It started. We have more than 10,000 victims. So people were killed during this war. And what's important to understand that this war is happened in the sovereign territory of Ukraine. So it's not in somewhere else. It's inside Ukraine, in its territory. So it's aggression against Ukraine. It's important. We still have this big fight between that people and that part of society which want to leave due to European and Euro-Atlantic, this vision, and who want this, Russian world or this authoritarian, kind of mode of corruption model and so on and so on. So it's still a fight inside Ukraine. To be honest, I couldn't even for me, it's hard to imagine how difficult for people not from Ukraine to understand what happened in Ukraine, because sometimes even for us, Ukraine, it's hard to understand what is happening inside our country. Ukraine is still moving towards EU and NATO. It's important. So despite all these barriers and all this Russian, attempts to stop Ukraine and to block by military aggression, by all this hybrid special operation, we still try. Sometimes it's small steps, sometimes we made steps back, but still we are trying to move towards EU and NATO.
It's a very important turn, the election of Zelensky, new president of Ukraine, who himself also proclaimed, and it was one of the pillars of his campaign, that he will try to make a more pro-European, pro-Western Ukraine. Could he fulfill his promises?
Due to orientation to EU and NATO, he's good. So despite Ukraine opposition right now, and still during all the second year he is in power, Ukraine opposition tried to challenge him due to this. Are you still moving Ukraine to EU or NATO or not? Or are you also want to provide kind of pro-Russian or Russian agenda in Ukraine? But no, Zelensky is keeping his word, let's say like this. But we have in this question. We have the problem that inside Ukraine we have a kind of division between these people who are in power and people who are right now in opposition. For example, I as a representative of civil society and kind of expert of society, we are still waiting for that who is in power and who is in opposition in case the question of integration to EU in NATO and NATO, they should be kind of one voice. So we still expect and wait that Ukraine as a state could become a kind of one voice in this NATO and EU integration. It's important. So despite of internal problems and all these fights, we should be one voice in this integration. Right now, it's a pity we are not.
Attila, I'm turning to you as a Hungarian voice in this conversation. How do you see, what's your approach to the changes in Ukraine in the recent years?
Well, we clearly have to see that Ukraine is a country at war. I personally saw the devastation on the eastern front lines. Whole towns were destroyed. I've been to Pesky, which is at the airport near Donetsk, and to a place called Shirokin and many other places. And you see whole communities, whole towns devastated by artillery, by street fighting, and people are dying every month, if not every day anymore, luckily. But people are dying on the front lines. We have to see that I think there are more than 10,000 dead, so it's a very bloody conflict. And this is a conflict which is full scale. Was a full-scale war with complete artillery barrages, with tank attacks. So it's not really well known, I think, in Hungary that large parts of eastern Ukraine were destroyed or very heavily damaged in this conflict and in this Russian aggression, because it was not only the separatists who were playing the part, but also there were Russian troops. I mean, it's very clear for anyone who has seen some of the satellite pictures are now available on the internet, so it's very clear that these are Russian columns entering Ukraine. That's one side of the story we have to see. The other side is, and of course, this is, and I completely agree with Dmytro that Ukraine is a split country on a NATO integration, or even less so, but on EU integration too. But this is in a way natural. So it's not that easy to change. Eastern Ukraine has a different tradition than Western Ukraine. Different ties to Russia, economic ties, cultural ties. So it's not that simple. And I think much what happened in Ukraine was stoked from the outside. So provocations, propaganda, but some of it is natural that some people in Eastern Ukraine, and I speak about millions, don't really see that way. And it's not that easy to solve. And one more thing, that what happened in Maidan was not only a pro-European revolution. It started definitely as the people of Ukraine were fed up with corruption, were fed up with the oligarchs, were fed up with the inefficiency of the state, were fed up with the very low life standard of Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine was not successful before Maidan economically, to say the least, compared to Poland or to Hungary or even to Romania. So that's one side of the story. But there was also a national revival, first after the 2004 Orange Revolution, and then at Maidan. I've been at Maidan a little bit later than the violence happened, and you can see that it's a strong national content in it. And this is, I think, we will turn to Hungarian-Ukrainian relations. That's a problem that this vision of Ukraine by some is crashing with some of the ideas of the minorities. And this is, again, natural, but we have to see that this is not necessarily the result of Russian propaganda. It's not the result of anybody's being evil, but it's the state of affairs that people have different ideas. I have one very bad news for Ukraine generally. I'm looking at from a geopolitical perspective, totally without emotions, and I have all the sympathy for the Ukrainians, but it seems that Russia wants Ukraine more than the West wants Ukraine, and Ukrainians, Ukrainian hopes in 2014 of great Western help, economic or military, we have to see that they did not there was some help, but they did not materialize, and I'm not sure that they will materialize, even if there is more Western help. Until Russia is strong, and in the next few years we expect Russia to remain strong, Russia will put even more to the conflict than the West. So it's not an easy situation. It's an extremely hard situation for Ukrainians, and again, it's a war.
If I may to add that also it's important to understand, and also to check, if you want to understand modern Ukraine, and especially this, let's say, state building process that started in 2004 probably, or even earlier, because we had one more revolution in early 90s, yes. So, for example, it's important also to compare not only what politicians are talking about, but also the public surveys. And for example, yes, still, question integration to EU and NATO, it's we haven't, 60-70% of support, but from year to year, people who support Ukraine's integration to NATO right now, it's close to 50% already. To imagine this 10 years ago, it will be never, ever. And one more thing, that what Russia aggression did, what actually Putin did. So he united Ukraine against this aggression and against Russian world. What totally we understand right now, it's clear that it doesn't matter in which part of Ukraine you are living right now, and when you ask people where you want to live and what kind of country you expect, it will be definitely not that we don't want a Russia here. So yeah, it's about what kind of Ukraine we want. It will be a huge discussion, long discussion, but 100%. For example, the recent kind of media small scandal in Ukraine, that some journalists found the picture of a small girl who published on Instagram when she were 14 or 16 years old, the picture that saved Donbass from Ukraine army and this Georgian tribe. And right now, she is working in one of the central TV stations in Ukraine. Right now, she's 20 years old. And what she explained that, okay, this picture is true. So I really posted that picture. But I was small. I was. It was a period when that war started. And for me, I was really small, stupid, she mentioned that, and for me it was hard to understand what is happening, so I was afraid. But right now, I'm older one, I'm a kind of professional, and I understand that I want to leave, work, and be a professional in independent Ukraine. So this is a kind of, the clear picture that even people who were supporting that, separatist movement and saw Ukraine army as a kind of aggressors, during last 5 years, they understood what means, what happened actually in Ukraine, that it was not Ukraine aggression in Donbass, it was a Russian aggression, and that Ukraine, it could be the success story. So this is the clear picture of a choice of the life. So this girl, small girl, who started as a kind of separatist lady, she ended up as a young professional in Ukraine. It's a clear picture.
We'll soon more or less get back to the Russia question, but let's turn to our focus now to the western part of the country and to Transcarpathia. We agreed before that we will use the term Transcarpathia for this part of the country where the Hungarian minority or community also lives. And let me just start with a little intro about when the relations took a contentious turn almost 4 years ago, when the then Ukrainian president Petro Poroshenko signed that particular and controversial language law, a bill which stated that secondary education in Ukraine would be taught strictly in Ukrainian, although minority groups could still learn their respective languages in other classes. And following this law, on the introduction of this law, or even the appearance of this law, of the idea of this law, Hungary started blocking the integration efforts of Ukraine to the EU and to the NATO, and the bilateral relations, so to say, didn't seem to change for the better in the coming years. And then came Zelensky as a new president. The two foreign ministers met in last September in 2020, Kellett and Szijjártó, and they had a longer discussion. And now we see, despite, and we'll talk about that as well, despite the events in December, which occurred against, again, the Hungarian community by SBU, by the Secret Service of Ukraine, it seems that the diplomatic ties are getting a bit better, so to say. And I would like to give the word now to Dmytro back to explain what he thinks and how he evaluates this whole context.
Okay, thank you. So if you don't mind, I will try in short version to explain a little bit all these issues with the language law and educational law. Yes, this tension between Ukraine and Hungary publicly started from September 2017 when this new education law was adopted. But to be honest, these unpublic tensions were even before. So if you checked the history, Ukraine at first, the state, the parliament, they planned to adopt at first language law. That's why even now, even inside Ukraine, many experts, they mixed this educational law and language law, because right now we have two laws, yes, which regulates using of language of national minorities in Soviet schools and in public. And what is the problem also with this educational law? That it was changed so in the parliament. So it was another draft of the law. The government proposed another draft of the law, I think more clear, because right now we have a real problem with this 7th article of this law. And in this 7th article, we have even few paragraphs. Because, for example, not so many people read this article till the end, because the last paragraph is mentioned that the using of other languages at schools should be regulated with other laws. So this article is too vague, and different political actors from the early beginning started to interpret this law in the way they want. And also national minorities started like this, because it's kind of objective reality when you have a law that it was adopted and then only and changed in the parliament and published it was 3 or 4 days after it was adopted. So nobody knows exactly what was the real text of that 7th article a few days after it was adopted. So it was a kind of misunderstanding for many. Plus Russia, of course, it was a really strong campaign. But on the other hand, the language issue, it's really emotional issue for Hungarians, for sure, and for Ukrainians. That's why right now we have a big, many layers of this. It's not a kind of disinformation, it's misunderstanding of this law. And also we have a kind of problem with this law because it's too vague. It's important for Ukraine state to provide, it's not even an explanation of this law, it's not enough. We need to have more other laws to have a strict understanding, for example, how national minorities should study at schools. Because take a look, what we have right now, it doesn't mean that from 5th form, according to this law so far, it doesn't mean that national minorities should study all subjects in Ukraine. No, there are some proportions that it should be more hours, not even subject, that to be taught in Ukraine after fifth class. So, but who will be the regulator? Who will provide that it should be this classes in Ukraine or this? So we still need to really implementation of this law and then explanation and so on. So and what is important, yes, this is the responsibilities of Ukraine state and of Ukraine government. And it should be the starting point in this negotiation with Hungary, with Romania, because we really need as a state to clear this picture. Because right now it's still, we have this transition period till 2023, but it's really close, 2 years already. But according to current tension with Hungary, right now it's clear also that the problem is not just with educational law or with language law or just with the rights of national minority. We have a big the biggest, I think, problem in bilateral relations during the modern history. So right now we are in the lowest level of our dialogue. And it's important to understand. So we have plenty work to be done. And the first thing, so right now we have a problem that even in this diplomatic level, we have no constant communication. This is the problem. So both sides even don't feel each other. And due to understanding and the empathy, we are really far away from this. So it's important. So, of course, you, me, we all expect more from our officials because, to be honest, I don't see the real problems between two countries because all that Hungary expect from Ukraine, I mean, it's a question of rights of national minority, dual citizenship, and so on. It's good for Ukraine, I think, because it will be the moving towards EU and NATO. So it will make Ukraine more sustainable. So due to my vision, so in the long run, I think we will manage this thing. It's not a problem. But in Kiev situation, I'm not so optimistic because and the practice shows that we have a very, very serious conflict right now.
Well, I fully agree that we have the lowest point in our relations, especially since we had extremely good relations until 2014. I think Hungary saw Ukraine as a model for dealing with the Hungarian community in Transcarpathia, and then for those who are not Hungarian or not Ukrainian, they should know that there are very deep Hungarian roots in Transcarpathia, at least more than 1,000 years of Hungarian culture there, and actually around 1,000 years of Hungarian statehood in Transcarpathia, and this is also an emotional issue. So when I go to Transcarpathia, and I do it frequently, when a Hungarian looks at the fortress of Hus, that's a poem for a Hungarian. When the Hungarian goes to the Verecke Pass, that's the national anthem for a Hungarian. So we have extremely deep roots, extremely emotional issue, and that makes it very hard to solve. And of course, it's very easy to manipulate also from outside, because this is emotional, and of course, it's emotional from the Ukrainian side. And I think some Ukrainians don't really understand how deep the Hungarian roots are in Transcarpathia, or even in the southern parts of Ukraine, some other parts of Ukraine. So we have a very long common history, and I think this is the lowest point. Well, maybe 1939 was the lowest point. We are not there yet, but and we have to definitely avoid going even more down. But the Hungarian side saw that we had very good relations. We had a bilateral treaty in 1991, in which Hungary made clear that we don't have any territorial issues with Ukraine, not then and not in the future, which was very unique for Ukraine because others, like for example Romania, did not recognize the Ukrainian borders, and Hungary was the first to do that. After 2014, actually, I was at the first meeting between the Hungarian and the Ukrainian Minister of Defense, and we told them that we will help. We told our minister told the Ukrainian minister that we will help Ukraine in all. And we did that actually within NATO. We supported Ukraine with money, with financial aid. We supported Ukraine with treating soldiers in our hospitals who were wounded on the front line. We supported Ukraine with experts. And we supported Ukraine with hosting Ukrainian children from the war zone. And I think that these were not really publicized in Ukraine after 2014. Only the negative news were publicized. So this is one of the first steps to publicize that actually Hungary was helping and is helping Ukraine even today. And there was a lot of help going to Transcarpathia in terms of water. When there was a problem with water supply, Hungary jumped in and helped the Transcarpathian authorities. So there was a lot of good things happening beyond the diplomatic tension, which was before 2017. I saw that from 2014 that we have a problem because we thought that the Hungarian interests are being disregarded, and let's say Hungarian community was a bit more under pressure under 2014, including some physical attacks on Hungarian. There was one attack which maybe not Ukrainian, made by Ukrainian nationalists. That's an interesting, the Uzhgorod attack in 2018. February, but there were other attacks which were clearly nationalist attempts to make the Hungarian community uneasy, and attacks on statues, for example, on the Verecka statue. I'm not saying it's a daily or monthly occurrence, but every year it's attacked basically. And I have to tell you that we always thought in the last more than 30 years of relations with, almost 30 years of relations with the independent Ukraine, that we held our part of the bargain. So when, for example, when some Hungarian statues were unveiled in Ukraine, there was a Taras Shevchenko statue unveiled in Budapest, and it's next to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, right next to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in downtown Budapest. There is a Taras Shevchenko statue with the Ukrainian flag, and the square was named after Taras Shevchenko. So we always try to give Ukraine positive signs. And in Bereksas, in Berehovo, the Taras Shevchenko statue was financed by Hungary. I don't know if the Ukrainian people know that. But actually, it's one thing. We always ready. Maybe we should do more to make Ukraine more accepting of our views. Maybe we should also investigate history, what happened in 1939. That definitely should be important for us to realize that we also did negative things which can be investigated, and history is definitely a point which we should be clear about. That, of course, in Hungary we have the tendency, or some, that we are always the victims, and that is not true. We have to see that, especially in Ukrainian relations, and especially in the 1939 event for us, the taking back of Transcarpathia for the Ukrainian population, or to a large part of the Ruthenian population, the occupation of Transcarpathia. So anyway, what I'm saying, that we are at a very, and I agree with Dmytro that we are at a very low point. Unfortunately, it can go lower. What we have to do really, and we have to work to avoid violence, because it was in the air several times in the last few years, and there were some incidents which were close to being violent. So we have to avoid that. Nothing totally unrepairable happened yet, so we have to avoid that, and we have to see that Hungary actually is supportive of Ukraine or Georgia's NATO integration, and we supported it in 2008. After 2002, we are only blocking high-level meetings at NATO. We are not blocking basic work at NATO, and I'm pretty sure that if we would have any certainty that the Hungarian education and the Hungarian, let's say, press can continue and there is less pressure on the Hungarian community, this could be lifted pretty easily.
And now we arrive to your article, to your recent article, which you co-authored for the Europejska Prawda. And you state basically, or you, the authors state basically two things. And we can talk about them together or separately, you will choose. The first one is that basically the SBU, so the Ukrainian Secret Service, became or has become in the recent years more independent in a political way, and that its leaders or other political circles around SBU are interested in a less pro-European Ukraine. So that's why they are trying to feed this conflict in Transcarpathia and to somehow use this as an example and to make the political ties more frozen in a sense. And the other claim is that basically Russia feeds the conflict, and he's as a tertius gaudens, as the law thinks third party, are trying to use all these conflict situation, political occurrence for their interests. Did I sum it up correctly?
For sure, yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
So let's start with the SBU. How do you see the role of the SBU in Transcarpathia and in these attacks in general?
On my point of view, this is the key problem in all this context of national minority issues in Ukraine, that SBU is the main institution which is responsible for this issue. I think it's not fair, it's not right, and it doesn't work. So, because it should be some another institution which should be responsible for national minority issues, because for modern Ukraine, and it was one of the value of Euromaidan actually, that minorities, national minorities, it's a treasure of Ukraine. It's not a threat. This is the main goal that should be in our mind. So, and the problem is that the SBU, they consider what is important, that in modern Ukraine, even Russian national minority also is a treasure of Ukraine. It's important that it was one of the value of Euromaidan. So many, not just Russian-speaking people were in Euromaidan against police, against regime, but also Russian as a nationalities. They were in Euromaidan. So, and I want to also repeat who were the first people who were killed. Yeah, it was not even Ukrainians. Also, what is important to remember that in the war in Donbass, the first Transcarpathian who were killed, it was ethnic Hungarian. It was Roland Popovich from Beregovo, Beregsas. Yes, so that's why the role of SBU in all this, it's not the question of the searching. I think it's the worst thing that could happen in our, bilateral relations. Okay, take a look. If SBU, of course, if they have evidences that Brenzovich is a real separatist and he, planned all that scenario that they described, okay, they are right. But so far, despite of the real big scandal and the damage that searching made to bilateral relations, we don't see the clear evidences. It was just few maps. Few of that maps even have in my laptop. So I am also a separatist. It's like, for me, this situation it's a real the bad situation. I couldn't even imagine that it could be. It could happen. That's why it's important that it's even how to say, it's not good that we discuss the role of SBU in this issue, because it shouldn't be SBU in this issue.
It shouldn't act as a separate actor.
Yes. So we need a kind of commission. It should be bilateral assembly or any soft institution that should work on this issue, and even without politicians, the politicians should just provide solutions, because even in this educational law or language law, I think if real professionals will work on it, we will find the solution. even due to all these emotional things. But the problem is that on educational law and language law, mostly are involved politicians, and it's even a question that it's not their job. That's why I think that in bilateral relations, and it's important that it should be high-level decision that we need to exclude SBU from its role that SBU right now is doing. It's kind of one of the main role. I think the main role in bilateral relations and in all minorities issues, national minorities, should so SBU should be in the lowest level of the list. We should start diplomats, experts, even politicians. Let be journalists, teachers, and so on, and probably in the end, in the tail of the list should be SBU. Okay, let it be, because it's.
Do you have any guess what made SBU so independent?
It's not a question of independence, probably. It's a question that SBU is a really strong institution. And take a look, it should be strong. But right now, also, as the reform of SBU, it's one of the key issue in this reform agenda in Ukraine. What is kind of coincident that week after this searching happened, or it was on Monday that searching happened, and that week was announced, so a few days after searching, was announced that the new law of SBU should be adopted in Ukraine. So right now, we have strong debates, not just inside in Ukraine, what should be a modern SBU, but also it's an issue in our negotiation with our Western partners, because the reform of SBU, it's Ukraine obligation in its way to NATO. So it's important issue. Take a look. I'm not against SBU. I think that SBU, Ukraine should have the modern, strong SBU that should work on really security these issues. And on the other hand, I'm sure that right now the issues with Hungarian minority, Romanian minority, it's not the security issue. The only part, or the only security part in this issue is the Russian influence. Because right now we clearly see how Russia is using this national minority issue to provoke conflicts, to provoke tension, to create kind of fog for its game, to weaken Ukraine, to weaken even Hungary. What is interesting that what I came across, that when we have a gap in bilateral relations, Russia, with all this propaganda, filled this gap. And it filled with the narratives, destructive narratives, for both sides. For example, for Hungary, Russia presents a narrative about Ukraine, that Ukraine is a failed state with the right-wing politicians, junta, and so on, who want to not just assimilate Hungarians, but want to kill even Hungarians, or move them back to Hungary. It's a clear narrative, yes, from Russia propaganda. For Ukraine audience, Russia propaganda provide another narrative, that Hungary is an aggressive state, that Hungary want to cut off Zakarpattia, that Orban is almost ready to get into the tank and move to Zakarpattia, to Transcarpathia. It sounds strange, it sounds funny for us, but this is the problem, that this propaganda works in both countries.
How does this appear in Ukraine, in those televisions that you mentioned?
Yes, could you imagine that, for example, the most popular politician, YouTube blogger in Ukraine, part of YouTube, is guy who is working this Russian propaganda network. And he was involved in this campaign, the last campaign against Hungary. So it's... For us, take a look, even for Ukrainians, even for expert community, for us it's still hard to evaluate this huge influence of Russian and pro-Russian agent. It doesn't mean the only this military sort of effect. It's a question of this information effect. So so they use all channels, TV stations, and this is affiliation with Medvedchuk, who is Putin's relative, and also this how to say, social media as well. So YouTube channels, Telegram channels as well. They use bots and so on and so on. So it's a big machine.
How do we see it, Attila, from a Hungarian perspective?
Well, I completely agree with Dmytro that certainly there are strange things happening. Very strange was the 2018 incident, and clearly in that case there was a clear link to Russia. And there are some links, not only in the case of Ukraine and Hungary, but in the case of Ukraine and Romania, especially the Uzveli incident, when we can see that that fires were stoked. What one of my colleagues did a study on how Sputnik and some Russian propaganda tools covered the Uzveli, and they were stoking up Romanian fears of Hungary and Romanian anger against Hungary. And I can see that definitely it can be a tool by some in Moscow to undermine bilateral relations, and actually it can be even worse in the future. Of course, it's very hard. There is a fog. It's very hard to pinpoint any one incident for 100% certainty that it was done by a provocateur. But the false flag operations, provocations are part of the tool set of all secret agencies, and all big powers use this, but Russians use it even more frequently than others. So we can see a pattern there for sure. And I think it will be my last comment. What Ukraine can do to avoid this and is to be, let's say, more accepting more of its diversity. What Dmytro underlined, that Ukrainians must see that this is not a danger. Hungarians now, a lot of Hungarians left Transcarpathia. I would be surprised if they are 10% of the population. They used to be much more, 25 or even more before the Second World War. Now it's 10% or even less. So I don't think that there is anybody with a clear mind can believe that there is a separatist threat in Transcarpathia. And again, Hungary is a member of NATO and the EU. That is impossible. And just one last word, that what we saw planted in Western press, that there is such a Hungarian-Russian cooperation. It was not only planted in Ukraine; it was planted into Western press from some very high levels, and I think it's pretty crazy. So I think we should do everything to make let's say a process between the two countries to assess the situation in Transcarpathia and to find solutions, because it is the interest of both. And I think we are both losing on bad relationship, but the biggest losers would be the Hungarian community and all of the people of Transcarpathia, since the development of Transcarpathia as an economic unit within Ukraine is I'm not saying it's impossible without Hungary, but Hungary can help a lot, since we are the link of Transcarpathia and the southern parts of Ukraine to the west. So together we could make that region successful, far more successful against each other, that whole region and beyond. In southern parts of Ukraine, Bukovel could be a Hungarian ski center, leaving tens of millions of euros every year from Hungarian pockets. I did ski there 3 times, 3 seasons. It's a wonderful place. There are a lot of opportunities, and if we don't, let's say, agree on some issues, we will lose Ukrainians, Hungarians alike.
Totally agree. And yes, the main instrument how we could counter Russian hybrid influence or malign influence is to reset bilateral relations between Kiev and Budapest. So if we will do good, we will have resilience. And in that case, all this Russian space operation, they will influence damagely the relations, but we will have the resilient base. So it's important to understand that when we are talking about Russian influence in bilateral relations, it doesn't mean that the main responsibility, is on Russia. No. The lowest level of communication and relation between Hungary and Ukraine right now, it's responsibility of Ukraine and Hungary, not the responsibility of Russia. Yes, Russia is working, of course, and we should understand and keep this in mind. But so everything is in our hands. That's why in Ukraine, we expect that Kiev and Budapest could reset relations. And we expect this, last 3-5 years. We really want this. So this tension, it's not in interest of Ukraine as well, for sure. Probably, and this is the problem, that we still have from both sides in Ukraine and Hungary, people who are involved in these relations, bilateral, and they are interested to maintain this conflict, because they could reach and receive kind of status, resource, some political dividends. But we need people from both sides who will be interested in this cooperation. Maybe it's not so, scandal, maybe it's boring, but right now, believe me, in this bilateral relations, we need boring diplomacy and boring solution to repair roads, to open new cross-border points, to build this road around Beregovo-Beregsa. So we need really boring things. And if we will have this boring thing, it will be more interesting in our relations between Ukraine and Hungary.
We really do hope that in this era, when it's very popular to read and watch videos or listen to podcasts about resets, it's going to be the time of a new reset between Ukraine and Hungary as well. Dmytro Tuzhanskyi, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and being here with us on MCC Geopod.
Thank you very much for invitation. It's a big pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this MCC Geopod episode. For further media content, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en or look for us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you want to read more by our professors and students, check out our knowledge base at corvinek.hu/en.